My name is Moni Mohsin, and I have the great pleasure of being in conversation today with Shehan Karunatilaka. Shehan is a very well novelist. Actually, I should do this, as I was saying to Shehan, in the time-honored fashion of saying, Shehan Karunatilaka needs no introduction, and then go on to introduce him. Um, but I am going to tell you a little bit about Shehan's new book, um, The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida, which is the Booker winner for 2022. It is a spectacular book, and like all great novels, it contains multitudes. It is also many things. It is a ghost story, it is a state of the nation book, it is a political satire, it is a whodunit, and it is a comic masterpiece, albeit about terrible, horrible, ghastly events. Um, it's a book which bursts with energy. It is a cacophonous book. It has many, many voices. And it's a book that I would recommend you all to read. It is about, I'll ask Shehan to tell you what it is about, but it refers to a particular event in the history of Sri Lanka, in its recent history, which had a very long tail and which resulted in the civil war. So I'll leave that to you to answer, Shehan, but I will also ask you another question alongside that, and perhaps if you could answer that after this. Um, I, being a novelist myself, I often find that I am inspired by sometimes a chance comment that I hear, or an image that I see, or a small report that I read in a newspaper. What was your inspiration for this book?
Um, Thanks for having me, by the way. And as you can see, I've got the sniffles. I think I've become allergic to lit fests. I think I've had 11 in the last 11 weeks, and so I'll try not to sneeze on the microphone or on you. Um, so with this one, with the first one, I had a definite, precise moment where the novel came into being. I was at a wedding, and these two old gentlemen, these uncles, very well dressed, started fighting each other at like 1 in the morning, throwing biryani on each other. And I remember sitting watching this bizarre sight. I mean, it was quite a comical fight, and thinking, what were these guys fighting over? And took me many months later to figure out they were fighting over cricket, and that was the genesis of Chinaman. What else would these 70-year-old men be so passionately fighting about? With this one, it was, I think, the time I was thinking of writing it was 2012, 2013. So the war ended in 2009. And this was a tremendous event. I'd grown up with the war throughout the 80s, throughout my lifetime. We thought it was a forever war. The peace process had broken down. And when I was writing Chinaman, we didn't expect the war to ever end. And then suddenly it did. And there was a lot of hope and optimism, especially among my generation. A lot of Sri Lankans who'd left the country were coming back, starting businesses, trying to bring new ideas.
What sort of time are you talking about?
So this is so now 2009 the war ended, 2010, 2011, 2012, and around this time was when Chinaman, the first book, was it was being published wider than I thought it was, and it won some prizes. So then you get asked, okay, what's your next trick going to be? And you haven't necessarily thought of that when you're writing your debut novel. And what was disappointing around 2013 when I sat down to do this was, it seemed that we'd had a 30-year war. You thought, okay, this would have put to bed all these ideas of, racial divisions that have plagued us. I thought, okay, finally we can unite as one Sri Lanka. But it just seemed an argument about the final phase of the war. Whose fault was it? All these civilians died. Was it the government? Was it the Tigers? And they were just arguing, having these documentaries. And that's where I guess, and like I say, it was a slow burn, but the idea, what if we interviewed the dead? They'll be, because the living were constructing new narratives, and it's nothing new. 2019, the Easter attacks, such a bizarre event that happened within a month. Suddenly we had radical Islamist terrorism in Sri Lanka, and then within a month it was all gone. And there's so many narratives around that. And again, no official, it gets forgotten. So this I just thought, okay, we need to interview the dead. That's the only way, because the living haven't got a clue what happened or how to make sense of it. So that was really the premise, but
And
I was, sorry.
sorry, carry on.
No, I was wary about interviewing the dead of 2009 because talking about contemporary things can get you in trouble in Sri Lanka. So therefore, I mean, sadly, there are so many periods in history I could have gone to. So I ended up going to 1989. But the same premise, what if we, again, 1989, we had 3 separate wars, a lot of unsolved murders, extrajudiciary killings. And I thought, what if we interviewed some of the victims of 89? So that was the premise. I mean, it evolved into different things after that, but the idea that we have a ghost story where Sri Lanka's dead could speak and offer their version of what happened, what the country has done to them, and what they feel about it.
And what they died for.
Yes.
Will you give us a little flavor of your book?
Yeah, sure. I will. So I've been reading a lot, and I've been reading the comic bits because they're easy to kind of share the tone of the book. But I'm going to read, since I've been doing this and it's my last Lit Fest for a while, I thought I'll read a slightly darker bit. This is where Maali Almeida, so he meets many ghosts and demons through the afterlife. I mean, the initial title for this book was Chats with the Dead. But in this chapter, he meets a dead priest who's sitting on the rooftop of this building where young people are being abducted and interrogated.
May I interject here?
Yeah.
So Maali Almeida is a photographer, is a war photographer who has gone missing. And the book opens with him in a place where he suddenly discovers that he is dead and he is in the afterlife. So this is Maali meeting other dead people.
Yeah, so the basic premise is he has 7 days or 7 moons in which to solve his own murder. And this is part of Sri Lankan folklore. We believe that the spirit hovers around for 7 days and we have our arms giving on the 7th. But also in those 7 days, as well as trying to solve his own murder, he ends up chatting to these different spirits and apparitions. So this is the chat with the dead priest. And suddenly the cold transforms into something familiar. Not something, perhaps more an absence of a thing, an emptiness that stretches to the horizon, a void that has known you forever. When your dear Dada departed, you ran through different scenarios every night while trying to sleep. Maybe he sensed you were queer. Maybe he wished you were him. Maybe you reminded him of her. Maybe he hoped you'd be worth more. You relived every sullen word, every petulant glance, every slight, every put down until your chest was hollow. You feel it, do you not? That is the energy. The hollowness and that loathing were not entirely unpleasant. Despair always begins as a snack that you nibble on when you're bored, and then becomes a meal that you have thrice a day. Who do you blame for this mess? Was it the colonials who screwed us for centuries, or the superpowers who are screwing us now? There is a terrible scream from down below, and the roof spits out black shadows, which the dead priest sucks up through what looks like a large straw. Who screwed us? The Portuguese assumed the missionary position. The Dutch took us from behind. By the time the Brits came along, we were already on our knees, with our hands behind our backs and our mouths open. I'm glad we were colonized by the British, you say. I suppose better than being slaughtered by the French, says the dead priest, or enslaved by the Belgians, or gassed by the Germans, or raped by the Spaniards. Sometimes I think of the mess that this country is in, and I think it might be better to let the Chinese or the Japanese buy us over. Let the Americans and the Soviets own our thoughts, or let the Indians take care of our Tamil problem, like we let the Dutch take care of our Portuguese problem. You are sitting in the shadow and breathing in the void. The dead priest sits across from you and whispers into the dark. This island has always been connected. We traded spices, gems, and slaves with Rome and Persia long before history books were invented. Our people too have always been tradable. Look at today. The rich send their kids to London, the poor send their wives to Saudi. European pedophiles sun on our beach, and Canadian refugees fund our terror. Israeli tanks kill our young, and Japanese salt poisons our food. It is then that you realize that there is somewhere you have to be and it is not here, and that if you stay here any longer, you will forget why you have arrived. The British sell us guns and the Americans train our torturers. What chance do any of us have? The priest has grown muscular and crawls towards you as she speaks. Her voice doubles and trebles and then multiplies. You recognize this walk and this growl. You pull away from the shadow and it blocks your exit. The Brits left us an unpolished pearl, and we have spent 40 years filling this oyster with shit. It now has its face against yours, and you are no longer sure if it is a he or a she. You feel the cold and the empty roaring through you. His eyes are made from 1,000 other eyes, and her voice is 1,000 other voices. That hum at the edge of our hearing is not a he or a she or a it or a they. It is a cacophony. Here's the stinking truth. Take a good whiff. We have screwed it up all by ourselves. The Mahakali's arms are around you, and someone else's arms are around you, and everyone's arms are around you. Say it once more, louder and slower. Its teeth are as black as its eyes, and when its mouth grows wider, you see its black tongue and the eyes peering from its throat. We have screwed it up all by ourselves. Thank you.
The you in this book is Maali. He refers to himself as you, or you refer to him as you. So it's a second person narrative. It's a difficult form. Why did you choose that? Why not the omniscient narrator or the first person, which is much more common?
I tried both. So I tried, every book starts in the third person, and so did this one. And I tried the first person as well. But it was again solving problems. What does a disembodied voice sound like? What does a ghost, most ghost stories you don't meet the ghost till the end, but here you meet the ghost right at the beginning. And so I had to figure out, one, what were the rules? How do ghosts walk around? Can they talk to anyone? So all those world building rules. But also, what does he sound like? What does he look like? I mean, we know what he used to look like. And this is after many months of agonizing at the problem, and I'd written pages around in these different voices. But I realized that perhaps the thing that if anything survives your death, it's the voice in your head, perhaps. That was my theory. So the voice in your head, and I found out this is true of not just me. The voice in my head is in the second person. I don't know of everyone else's heads, but people I talk to say, yeah, it does seem like someone else. It's not like me. It's someone else telling you, you should have done that. Why did you do this? And so that made sense to me. So the narrative voice, it's not quite the Maali Almeida who lived from 1950 to 1990. It seems like it's almost like, I mean, you can interpret it either way. It's the voice of his soul or his conscience or him across different births. So that's what, and so then I realized, okay, let's try this in the second person. And I mean, there's been a few great novels. I mean, Mohsin Hamid has written two in the second person, and it's difficult to pull off. But it just seemed to make sense for me that the voice in your head is in the second person, and I just had a lot of pages that flowed after that, so I stuck with it. But the audiobook, interestingly enough, the Shivanta Vijay Singh who narrates it, he has a slightly different register when he does the narrative to when he talks from Maali's point of view. It's almost like the narrator and the character are slightly different. So, I mean, these are all things I intellectualized later, but I just think that was the initial reason for it. The voice in your head is second person.
It works very, very well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, because it's not Maali, and yet it is Maali. Yeah. So the protagonists of both Chinaman and Seven Moons are dissolute characters. Maali is inveterate philanderer. He's an accomplished liar. He is a gambler. And he will work for anybody who pays him, regardless of their ideology. In Chinaman, the protagonist is a drunk. What is the lure of these people? Why not the sort of knight in shining armor, boring as though they are?
Yeah, well, you said it. I think we've done with knights in shining armor, and there are not many knights in shining armor in Sri Lanka. And so, like, see, look, they asked, this question was posed to me. You're writing so-called, I mean, I call it detective fiction. The first one is a missing person story. Second one is a murder mystery. But why, if you're writing detective fiction, why aren't there any detectives in it? Why are they both journalists? And I had to think about it, but I realized you don't have Poirot or Sherlock Holmes in Columbo or Candy. You don't have the guy coming, smoking their pipe and solving the murder. The murder happens, and then someone covers it up, and then it's forgotten. And you don't. And it's the journalists who actually go out there, put themselves at risk to find the truth, and end up paying the big price for it.
Yes.
So that's one thing, but I can tell you one at a time. So WG, the character, it came out of necessity because I tried writing the book from many perspectives, the biography of Pradeep Matthews' life. And it's only when this sports writer, who was drunk, but because he was drunk, he'd done nothing. He hadn't engaged with Sri Lankan politics. He had no relationship with his family. He had watched every single cricket match Sri Lanka played since 1952. And so this was like a compelling character to me, this guy who's... And the war is tangential to the first book. It's there in the background, but it's really about these two men who said, we can't change Sri Lanka, we can't do anything about the war, let's just watch cricket and drink arak. And this was an appealing character to me. And I think if you compare the two, I probably wouldn't mind hanging out with WG Karunasena and watching some cricket match with him and hearing his stories. I wouldn't, after a few drinks he'd get irritating, but he's a lovable rogue, if you like. But Maali Almeida, you're right. I don't know if I'd want to spend much time with this arrogant, self-involved, delusional guy. But there is a begrudging admiration I had for him because he's like me, a product of the Colombo bubble. We lived in Colombo, insulated by, and you see it today. The country's going through an economic crisis, but Colombo were partying in December. The Christmas lights were on during a power crisis. So I think he was, and I lived in that bubble when the war happened, and I didn't do much about it apart from write a novel 30 years later. But Maali Almeida being this character who actually went out and took photographs because he wanted to expose the atrocities. And so he had this idealism and this bravery that I didn't have. And again, I think it went with the territory. Why would this guy do it? It's one thing it was that he felt he was good at it, but also this gambler aspect. He saw everything as a calculated risk, and also the fact that he was a closet gay man who had a voracious sexual appetite, which he couldn't satisfy in Colombo polite society. So these were all reasons why he chose to go to the war zone and photograph these things. But yeah, I mean, we've discussed this in other panels, whether your protagonist needs to be likable. I don't necessarily think they have to be, but as long as
They're compelling.
they're compelling and you are on board with what they're trying to achieve. You are eager to see, okay, what are these photographs under his bed? Who actually killed him? If you're on board with that, you don't necessarily have to like him. Though I would say that both of them have a redemption arc and maybe they become a bit more likable towards the end. I don't know. No spoilers, but I do think they start off as pretty obnoxious characters, but maybe there's some redemption arc to them.
The astonishing feat in this book is the fact that Maali is dead. As such, he has no agency. You have made rules about what he can do and what he can't do. He can't speak. I mean, he can speak to other dead people, but he can't speak to living people. So when he wants those photographs discovered, his choices are very, very narrow, limited. He can't tell people to go and find them here or there. He is also somebody who cannot burnish his image now. It's too late. He's dead. And yet he finds redemption. Yet there is a narrative arc. Yet we discover him. Yet we grow to respect him and at the end to love him. At least I did. Yeah. And how do you manage that?
Wow, when you put it like that, it sounds impressive, right?
It is impressive. It's very impressive.
I mean, it took place over... So the first problem to solve is... these are very practical problems. What does a ghost do all day long?
Yeah. How does it travel? That's a lovely one you invented.
And you can't interview a ghost. You can... I talked to clairvoyance and all that, but I never met a ghost. And so you have to kind of rely on folklore and near-death experiences and all that. So I devised a few rules. There were about 20 rules. I think we distilled it down to 3 important ones. And one is that you can only go where your body has been. So this made sense that's why ghosts they haunt the cemetery or the house they used to live in. They can't just take a trip. Yeah, go to Paris Disney. And hang out there, go to Disneyland. Yeah, they can't. So there's restrictions there. They can also travel the winds. So, and a lot of the writing for this book took place at 3, 4 in the morning. Suddenly the wind would blow and the window would slam, and you'd wonder if there's someone sitting on your shoulder whispering. And who knows that there isn't? I mean, when you've been in the throes of writing a novel, it sometimes seems like someone else is telling you the story. So the idea that you can travel through wind. But I think the main thing was you can travel wherever your name is spoken. And this was poignant in a way because I think as a dead person, you suffer a second death when the last person on earth remembers you. That's why, in ghost stories, you don't get ghosts surviving beyond their, 3 generations, or once their grandchildren are dead, you don't hear much about ghosts. But also it allowed me, and this is over, because you're right, it's a disembodied spirit who can't communicate. How is he going to solve a murder? So this allowed him, wherever his name was spoken, he could go and go to, and so that allowed me to advance the plot because all the different people who were discussing him were suspects and all of that. But yeah, because I thought, okay, if he could talk to people, then, we'd all have ghosts in our ears. And so devising these rules took a long time. But I think once I was comfortable with the idea of the afterlife as a bureaucracy where there is a system, but it's broken and no one knows where they're supposed to be and how to get their passport stamped to the afterlife, that idea was absurd.
And nobody knows how to queue.
So this is something that changed because in 2022, Sri Lankans learned how to queue. That was the one thing we learned, the petrol queues. And so, yeah, the opening chapter is about how Sri Lankans don't know how to queue. And then in 2022, that's the one thing we learned. Now, people don't tolerate, if you're in a petrol queue and someone tries to jump the queue,
get killed.
It's quite tense. So, yeah, so that part, the present day Sri Lanka proved me wrong. But, these were all, so this idea, okay, so that's how, so now he has to find a way to whisper. You can whisper through dreams. And so this was all obstacles you put, but
You did it
was
very
quite
elegantly,
challenging.
though. Very elegantly. I have read that you, and I've also heard you say this, that you are very influenced by and inspired by Kurt Vonnegut as a writer. Because Kurt Vonnegut has the ability to change registers very, very quickly. In the space of 2 or 3 sentences, he will go from tragedy to farce. And it will not seem disjointed, and it will not seem weird. You have the same ability. You have jokes, you have fun, you entertain your reader, and you make your reader laugh. And at the same time, within a couple of sentences, you are reading about the most heartbreaking murder, the most terrible and gruesome death of a young person who's died after prolonged torture. You describe the ghosts sitting in there, watching the murder of their friends and of their relatives. It's all very difficult stuff, and yet you pull it off. Were you ever worried? When I write a little bit of satire, and I'm always concerned that, particularly when you're writing about important things, and you are being funny about it, at the same time you shouldn't trivialize it. So how do you always, you invariably just pull back every time, and it remains moving. It remains moving yet funny.
No, it's certainly, it's a fine line. And yeah, Kurt Vonnegut I've talked about many times. George Saunders, Margaret Atwood, Douglas Adams. These are
Dickens.
Dickens as well. Very entertaining writers who are talking about. Douglas Adams is talking about the meaninglessness of existence and humankind's insignificance in the whole universe. But it's not. These books are riot, and so Kurt Vonnegut's talking about how we're just a bunch of barbarian monkeys who are going to destroy ourselves and the planet. But his books are also a riot, and I think the reason is the common thread, and I've thought about this, is absurdity. I think all these writers are writing about absurdity, and absurdity is certainly part of the Sri Lankan condition. And it's not like I injected humor, like I wrote a depressing story and injected humor into it. It came organically from the voice. And he has this glib gallows humor to him. But you're right, when you're discussing quite gruesome things, there is a time to switch off the jokes and really reflect on that. And we didn't have to do a lot of editing that way. I think the voice, and that's the thing with a book, when you have the voice, it kind of leads you in the right direction. And Yeah, we did delete because he does make a lot of wisecrack. I think WG makes the wisecrack, goes for the punchline rather than the truth. I think Marley's a bit more restrained, and we took out a lot of the dumb jokes because sometimes when you're too smart alecky and too wisecracking, you're right, you trivialize what you're talking about. So that was a balancing act that was done in the edit as well. But yeah, you have to because you're talking about this is true history, and the real story of 1989 is far more gruesome than anything in this book. And so therefore, I think just looking at it through an absurdist lens, that's how I see it. So when you're looking at it in an absurdist lens, yeah, you're still being respectful about what's happening, but you're also like saying how ludicrous this is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is also like a defense mechanism of societies like ours, where you feel powerless a lot of the time. You know, you feel powerless, you feel angry as well, and what comes out is gallows humor. I think it's common to a lot of places like ourselves.
And Pakistan's got a great tradition of satire,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I think it is a coping mechanism. And I've talked about the Sri Lankan smile, how we are portrayed in our tourist brochures as these smiley, happy-go-lucky, hospitable people, but we also smile when we're angry,
Yeah.
when we are confused, when we don't want to lose face. There's a lot hidden behind the smile. And I think same with humor. Either we're going to be screaming at each other or punching each other, or we're going to be making jokes at each other. And so I think it is a defense mechanism, but also you can't underestimate the power in it, because
It makes life bearable.
but also the power, because we chased a president and a regime last year that we feared 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you spoke about the same regime, you'd get disappeared. We had journalists being killed in broad daylight. But 10 years afterwards, it seemed the whole country was emboldened to mock them on social media and on the streets. And it's almost like they lose their power when.
Yes.
Humor is a weapon as well.
Yes.
It is a coping mechanism, but it is a powerful weapon if used properly.
It cuts people down to size. It cuts monsters down to size, doesn't it?
And satire, I think it's strange that even during the height of 2010, where there's a lot of press suppression and all that, there was a satirical play called Pusvedilla, which was a hit show all over Colombo. And one day, I know Feroz Kamardin, the director, and it's not subtle at all in terms of how it portrays the politicians. And the president of the time asked to, can I buy Saturday's show? And guy came in with a big sack of money and said, okay, Saturday's show done. And they filled it out with, he invited, ambassadors, foreign guests, journalists, and all of that. And he was right in the front row. And, he was in the third row. And Feroz just said he was hilarious throughout the play. Every time someone cracked a joke, the first 3 rows looked back to see what and then if the president was laughing, everyone's ha ha ha. And so every joke happens, everyone looks, and then they laugh, and that was the whole thing. But that show, and the president said, don't censor, just do your show as you normally do it. And so somehow satire seems to, and perhaps also because it's writing in English. So we know the response to Hanif's exploding mangoes in Urdu versus English. So maybe they feel, okay, let's entertain these Colombo liberal types. Let them feel that they are getting away with it. But if I was writing in Sinhala, perhaps they wouldn't be so understanding.
Which brings me to this question about the photographs. So Maali is very keen to find the photographs, or get somebody to find the photographs, print them, and publish them, and display them in an art show, because he feels that if the photographs are seen by the people, they will bring down a government or stop a war. It's very idealistic. Do you believe that art has that power? It can do that. It can bring about political change. It can bring about, of itself, it can bring about a new way of thinking that emboldens people to take certain steps.
Well, okay, let's go to the photographs. The photographs the reason I chose him to have this box of photographs is, it just seems like our 30-year war, and 1983, now that's the start, the pogrom against the Tamil people in 1983 around the countries, that's the start of the whole mess. But very little photographic evidence. There's the same 3 photographs that get recycled every July. And even with our war, it's almost like it's fading from memory because, there's a lot of books written about it, but that photographic evidence is not there. And so Maali, I suppose, quite naively thinks that the reason Colombo is sitting by doing nothing while these atrocities are happening is because they don't know about it. And so therefore, all these photographs need to be shown, and then people will understand. But I mean, without giving too many spoilers, the arc of the photographs also takes a bit of unexpected turn. And because, I have to be accurate to history. The fact is, after 1990, it's not like the war ended. It went on for another 20 years. And it's strange because I get asked this question, is there hope? And, I've lived too long. That's I've lived through too many false dawns. And I remember each one. 1994, we re-elected CBK, Chandrika's government. We thought, okay, there's going to be the war's going to end, and nothing of the sort happened. The 2001 ceasefire, 2009, 2015. Every time, and even now they're saying, okay, we were in trouble last year, but now it's a new government, new era. Things are going to get better. So, I don't know. I'd like to think so, but the evidence hasn't borne that out. And same with your question. Can books, can photographs stop wars? Well, it hasn't done a very good job so far. Tolstoy wrote War and Peace, a masterpiece about the atrocities and contradictions of war and the human condition. Didn't stop Russia from getting into any wars in the 20th century or the 21st. And and there was one, I think, at the Litfest all blur into each other. I think it was Kerala or Jaipur. There was a similar panel where they were asking about can books end wars? And they had like this pacifist Vietnamese poet and 2 like star generals talking about it. And the poetry was moving, but it didn't really convince the generals to put down their guns. And so, but it was strange because a lot of young people in the audience going, no, we think that books can end wars and all that. And, you don't want to stamp on their idealism. I think what they can do is this. One thing I found is a lot of young people born in the 90s and the 2000s reading Maali Almeida who are unaware of 89 and 83 because they're not being taught this in school. So perhaps over a generation you read this and then you go back and understand what happened, and maybe the next generation doesn't repeat the mistakes. Maybe that could happen, that you change attitudes over time. But the evidence doesn't really bear it out. I mean, has there ever been a period of world peace for all the anti-war books written?
There
I'm not
hasn't.
sure.
But the thing that still is interesting is that is how powerful people who feel threatened by art will try and suppress it. So they see its threat. Even if it does not achieve anything in real life, they still want to suppress it. So they must fear it. So Hanif's book, which you're talking about, the case of exploding mangoes, we never got to see the Urdu version. It was taken away immediately. Yesterday, I attended a session with Adila, the artist, and she was talking about how her work in Karachi, which was an installation about the extrajudicial killings, was removed as soon as it went up, and they broke it and took it away. We also know that I certainly haven't seen any photographs of 1971. I hadn't when I lived in Pakistan. The first time I saw them was when I was invited to a exhibition of photographs in London, and I went, and there were, by a famous photographer, and there were pictures of the atrocities in East Pakistan. That was my first encounter. I was about, I think, 45 at that time, and I hadn't seen them. So we also know that the photographs that came out of Abu Ghraib, for instance, did make an impact on people, and it did dent America's sort of, they've carried on sort of committing atrocities in Iraq, but it did dent their image, as purveyors of democracy.
Didn't keep them out of wars, but
They
at
didn't
least,
keep
yeah.
them out of wars.
So perhaps I'll concede that you can shift attitudes slowly, inch by inch,
Inch by painful inch.
centimeter by centimeter. You can, and also, I mean, I think writing about Sri Lanka's past, I know a lot of other novelists are doing that. I think this can only be a good thing because we're not being taught. We're taught about our ancient kings, about the Portuguese and the British. We're not taught about the last 40 years, what happened. And but now,
So
of course,
putting
the
it on
kids.
record.
Yeah, so I think if a book can be the gateway drug and also the information is out there now. The kids have access to the internet and so on. So I think maybe that's what art can do. The more that we talk about this, we have because I really think Sri Lanka can only be cured across a generation. I don't see any solutions happening tomorrow or day after. But if we're lucky, one generation we can do this. And I think books are a great tool. Art is a great tool for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll open for questions. Please keep them brief and make them questions. Thank you very much.
That was really insightful. And I found this conversation around the idea of trivialization quite interesting, but then you actually revisited it. And I just wanted further clarity on that. But obviously, you're dealing with themes which are too somber and significant to be trivialized. But at the same time, I think the main apprehension or anxiety of despotism is to not be trivialized. So it's a very fine balance between not trivializing the subject, but at the same time deconstructing the despot and make him look like a fool. And I wonder whether your choice of satire is partially driven by that, partially by the fact that we do live in despotic societies, so it's self-preservation, and partially because, characters which are non-conformist and characters which are aberrational, in many ways, are never liked by societies which like to order things in a certain way. That was my takeaway, and I was just wondering whether those are the multifarious reasons why you would choose a narrative voice which is irreverent.
And also on the fringes, right? Because I often thought, why are there not any more photographs of 83? 8,000 people were killed. We don't even have an official death count. And I know Anita Pratap was on the ground, and but we only have 3 photographs. So I often wondered about that. But I think also with the trivialization, he can come across as quite glib, and but also he's borne the brunt of it. It's his murder, and so he can see the comic side in watching his own body being chucked in a lake and not sinking, and maybe it also offsets the tone, because otherwise the book would be quite depressing and grim throughout, and I think him making a wisecrack throughout kind of keeps it light. But Hanif was far more braver than me. He took a direct shot at the despot. In mine, the figures in power are kind of shadowy, nebulous figures where you can't have one politician taking offense to it. But Hanif, and so I don't have that bravery. I kind of the bad guys are all this amorphous lot which no one. And also I wrote about 89 in 30 years later, where all the people who could take offense were dead, and that was what I hoped.
In the lake.
In the lake, yeah.
There. Is the microphone? Can you take
Sorry,
it?
may I go ahead?
Sorry, Oh, there you are. Sorry,
Yes.
yes.
Thank you so much for coming. This was a very insightful talk. And my question is, so you touch upon this somewhat in the book as well, but I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the politics of language policy in Sri Lanka and its link to the civil war. And I'm hoping this question is relevant because Pakistan has had its own extensive history of violence and aggression linked to language and language policy.
Yeah, so I said 83 was the start of the whole mess. I think actually that's inaccurate. 58, the Sinhala Only Act, passed by Bandaranayake, Chandrika's dad, Oxford-educated Anglophile, who, and this we see it even today. These are easy, lazy ways to win elections. You pander to the majority, and so these divisions, they turn up every election cycle, because I don't believe that Sri Lankans, having traveled extensively and met people from all sides of the conflict, that we're intrinsically racist at a cellular level, or homophobic, or that we are communal, but these things happen. And so 1958, the Sinhala Only policy that drove out, it was intended to stop the Tamil people, the Muslims and the burghers from getting the top jobs. And we had I mean, the burghers leaving in the 60s, a huge cultural loss there, and sporting as well. And then in the 70s, 80s, the Tamils left as well, and obviously some of them got militant. So, and that again has not been resolved. The last Independence Day, which was February 4th, one heartening thing is they sang the national anthem in Tamil. And this has again been a silly debate that you think would have been, so in 2009 after the war ended, they weren't singing the national anthem in Tamil and they even made it illegal to do that. Then 2015, when we had the new government in, that was implemented again. And yeah, now they sang it last February, but who knows how that will lead. But one thing positive is now my children are growing up trilingual, which when we grew up, we had Sinhala class, Tamil class. When the ball went missing during interval, we end up picking fights with that's what happened, yeah. The football goes off the railway tracks, okay, let's pick a fight with the Tamil class. And that's how we grew up. And I mean, it's horrible, but now my children are, one thing, everyone's mixed and everyone's learning all three languages. So these are positives we can take out. But yeah, the debate is still raging. I'm sure next election cycle there'll be some idiot talking about why we singing, because I've heard that argument, the Japanese don't sing, the Indians don't sing it in 5 languages, the Americans don't sing it in 4 languages, why are we doing this and all that stuff. But knowing that these are small concessions that could prevent another conflict. So yeah.
Thank you. One last question at the back there. Oh, you've got
This
the mic.
gentleman
Sorry.
has been
the mic, but I'm not sure if I should just pass it on.
no.
Up to you. Carry on.
Just a small question, because in the previous session there was also this question about writing from the oppressor's point of view, and I wouldn't go ahead as to use loaded terms like oppressor or colonizer, but because you also mentioned growing up in Colombo, and positionality is a thing when it comes to writing. I believe you are Sinhalese, and I just wanted to ask if that might have kind of translated into the kind of stories that you're telling or the voice that you are presuming. Thank you.
Yes, I'm a Sinhalese Buddhist, and Sinhalese Buddhism has become there's no such thing. There's Buddhism and there's the Sinhalese language, but that thing got fused in the 19th century and became this political term and this idea that the nation is a Sinhala Buddhist nation and everyone else is a guest. And these ideas are still, they were mainstream when I was growing up. They're still around. And so I think if you look at both my protagonists, I suppose that they're all, so Maali Almeida is mixed, so his mum was Tamil, half Burgher, and his dad was Sinhala. WG was a Sinhalese Christian, but they all see the absurdity in this sort of Sinhala Buddhist nationalism and where it's led the country. So maybe that informs me as well, because I've had many heated arguments with my dad went to a very Sinhala Buddhist school and believed in they had to salute the flag every morning and talk about the kings and all that. So I had, growing up, had many arguments. I was growing up during war, so perhaps that informed. And also I'm allowed to make fun of the Sinhalese because, so there's that privilege as well. But yeah, certainly I think I do feel that guilt as a Sinhala Buddhist. Yeah.
Your last question. Thank you.
I had the privilege of going to your beautiful country about 5 years ago. And when I went, the taxi drivers, everybody was so grateful to meet a Pakistani because apparently our military had been instrumental along with the Chinese in helping the civil war end in terms of help the Sri Lankan government defeat the Tamil Tigers. And then there was a lot of talk. The Chinese had just been given a port, and then it was taken away and given to India. Indians did with it, came back to the Chinese. So geopolitically, between India, Pakistan, and China, I was just wondering if you could educate us a little bit as to what the positioning is given the new government and the changes. Where does Sri Lanka see itself in terms of maintaining its relations and between a huge country just on top of it like India, and then China, the Chinese influence and the little Pakistani influence there? Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a huge tightrope that we have to walk now. And it's ironic because we celebrated Independence Day, February 4th, 75 years, and there was a lot of criticism. They spent 100 million, 200 million on this Independence Day celebrations. which, you know, in a time where that money could go to feed the poor or buy medicines and, you know, obvious things like that. And also the people were kept away because there'd be protests again. And it was just this show of military strength. It was just tanks and people walking, you know, soldiers walking with guns. And it just struck a lot of us as ironic, you know, that we're independent of after 400 years of colonialism. But, you know, we have creditors, we have debtors, we have overlords, we're owned by all these different forces. And yeah, we have to, now that tightrope between playing China and India off against each other, that has to be done very carefully. I do know this much though, that when the crisis last year was at its peak and there were petrol queues and gas queues and people on the streets, China didn't have a lot of support to give us. They were like, well, give us our money, pay our debt, and it's only India and Pakistan who reached out as neighbors, because perhaps knowing that an unstable Sri Lanka is going to have repercussions for the rest of the region. But look, foreign policy-wise, I don't know if there's a clear plan, but we need to balance. We can't afford to align ourselves with one faction. But you are right that now the end of the war, for many years we were contending with the West, and you know, the peace, the Norwegian peace settlement and so on, and talking about human rights, and it was always a stalemate, and that the government at the time made the decision, okay, let's kick out the West, kick out Amnesty, the Red Cross, everyone, and let's align ourselves with the Chinese and get the weapons in and end this war. So that decision, you know, you still have the repercussions, but it's strange. It's I don't know if there's a plan. I hope there is, and that we are managing it. But looks like we have bigger things to worry about than foreign policy. But we need to keep our neighbors happy.
With that, I will end the session for today. Thank you so much, Shehan. I know that you're struggling with a cold, but thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. No, my cough vanished. I think it was wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you for answering these questions so fully. Thank you for engaging with us so open-heartedly. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Shehan's
very much.
book is available in the hall downstairs. Please do go and buy it. It's a fantastic book, and I recommend it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Moni. Thank you very much. Yeah.